example, there is an interesting tool that I would recommend everyone having a look at. It's called ESRally. So, and this is a benchmarking tool. So allows you to simulate different workloads. So you have different experiments that they're calling as races. You're going to run different scenarios, which they're calling tracks. And if you want to see how these two are, how these are comparing to each other, so let's say you make a modification, you want to see how that is impacting the results, you can put them through what they're calling as tournaments. There are also, you can configure cars, which are basically services of Elasticsearch, but obviously you're going to want to point at your own cluster. It's really important to build the cluster in a correct manner to build it. And this is why you're going to look at storage, memory, CPU, networking requirements, and these are the blocks that we're going to use for building your cluster. Starting with the storage. So for intensive use cases, you're going to look at fast SSDs that provide good performance in terms of both writes and reads. They're great for hot warm architecture in the hot part of this. So they're good for hot workloads. You can go the cheap way and use mechanical hard disks, but they're better for less intensive use cases, or in case of a hot warm architecture, you're going to go for the warm workload. If you want to limit the speed of the indexing and allow additional I/O operations to happen, merge operations in the background, there are different approaches you can take with Elasticsearch to basically lower these speeds and allow additional headroom for the hard drive. You can use the throttling, for instance, when it comes to storing the data. You can theme the drives in RAID layouts to improve performance. And also you can use attachments. It's okay if you use direct attached storage or fast SANs, but don't try to avoid NFS or SMB because of the overhead. They're not really really efficient. Elasticsearch will use heap memory. It gets assigned to store the information about the cluster, shard segments, indices, field data, basically the operations of the cluster. But it will also take advantage of the US's remaining available memory to cache data. So it's going to help different operations and reduce disk reads. For this reason, it's always better not to think I'm going to throw everything I have, including the kitchen sink, at the heap. If you end up assigning, let's say, 90% of the physical memory to the heap, you might see that the cluster is behaving worse than it was before. Depending on the total amount of physical memory available to the server and the garbage collection mechanism, if you assign more than 31 gig of heap and you are using CMS, we'll talk about this a bit later, you might end up with big stop the world pauses. So if you are using CMS, it's advisable to remain under 31 gig of heap. And if you can give 50-50 to heap to the physical memory to the OS, as long as you're not going over the 31 gig of heap. If you are using like beefy machines, just give 31 gig to the heap and leave the other to the OS if you are not co-locating, obviously. Elasticsearch nodes are using different thread pools to help with the management of different operations. And if you are exceeding these pools, you're going to end up in some queues where the operations are waiting for threads to become available and for them not to be discarded. If you do exceed the queues as well, you will end up with rejects. The limits are being automatically calculated based on the number of processors discovered by the installation. You can also configure them, but it's not really advisable because you might end up with OEMs. On network, this is really a problem for Elasticsearch, but in case of really large clusters, the idea is that you don't really know when something is gonna happen, which is gonna be strange. So you might end up with like network saturation or things like this. And in this case, you might want to make your network faster, or you might, as you've done with, as we talked earlier about the storage, you might want to limit some of the operations that are happening. So as an example, you can set the indices recovery max bytes per second, up from the 40 meg or down from the 40 meg, whatever it helps you. This is a way in which basically you are preventing the nodes from sending outbound or inbound traffic over this limit. So this is a node only setting. If you have other nodes recovering at the same time, this is gonna spike up. The most important thing that I've seen to start in building a good size and performance cluster is to do this balancing act in which you are keeping track of different parameters and you need to make sure that they're within that particular limit. So let's see how each of the things come into play. Usually for small clusters, the problems are usually really small. Things are happening more or less out of the box. You get, before in older versions, you were getting more primary shards and a replica. Now you get one primary shard and a replica. We'll talk about this a bit later. The thread pools get defined automatically. Things are easy. With large deployment, even the smallest change can have a great deal of impact. So the more you forecast, the better it's going to be for your wallet and for your application. One of the components of this great balancing act is the heap versus storage ratio. So it's how much heap you are offering to the Elasticsearch installation and how much data you're going to store in it. Elasticsearch recommends for search workloads to keep this quite low, so 1 to 16, maybe even 1 to 8. You can even go 1 to 1 if you can afford. It's going to only make it faster. For logging use cases, this is not really that important, so you can break this and go in a cheaper way, such as spinning disks. Again, benchmarking is your friend. These are not cast in stone, so if you don't benchmark, you won't really know. On shard numbers, the replica shards are used for read performance as well as high availability. So people have a tendency to just throw shards. A shard is an instance of Lucene, so it comes with overhead on CPU storage, RAM. You don't want more shards than you actually need to. So don't throw 1,000 shards at an index. Just start maybe with the defaults and use the shrink and split API to change the number of primary shards. And in case you need more indexing performance, you can scale the replicas later, or you can index with no replicas and add them later. Adding replicas is usually a dynamic operation, so you can do it anytime. On the shrink and split API, be mindful of it. I mentioned that you can use it. Be mindful when using it because it could affect both performance. It needs the index to be read-only, so you're not going to be able to use it fully. In some cases, you're going to need to basically index if the file system doesn't allow hard links. So and also apart from the performance, you're going to take a hit on the data usage in case the index cannot be hard linked because you're going to have both indices alive at the same time. On the number of shards, it's a good indication to keep this between 20 to 25 shards per gig of heap configured. And in order to keep these numbers at bay, there are different tools that you can use. Two of them are Curator and Index Lifecycle Management, where you basically define when an index can just be closed and then deleted, and it's going to get rid of your shards. Be mindful of using this. Again, the value is not cast in stone. When it comes to how our team looks at things, we're trying to keep our shard counts under 700 per node. So with 31 gig of heap, as we talked about on CMS, you're going to end up with around 23 shards per gig of heap. For logging and metrics use cases, you can use the defaults for an index, which is 5 primary shards and 1 replica for older versions. In Elasticsearch 7, they changed this to 1 primary and 1 replica because of the oversharding that I mentioned earlier. The more nodes you have, the higher chance of these nodes will start failing, and you might end up losing data even if you have replicas in place. So you need to think about adding additional replicas if you see this happening. And if you want to add replicas and data scale or I/O is a big problem for you, there is an option to set best compression for index codec, and this is gonna basically lower the footprint on disk, but increase the CPU activity. For search use cases, to increase search performance, more replicas are added for this, because one query is executed in a single thread per shard in Elasticsearch, and but multiple shards can be executed in parallel. So when you're adding additional shards, you're going to get more throughput. Shard sizes. Querying lots of small shards will take the process per shard faster, but if you are doing more operations and you need to aggregate the responses, you don't really know if it's going to be better than having bigger shards. On the opposite side, if you have huge shards, because the shards will need to store some things in the heap space, you're going to end up with higher heap usage, and as well as it's going to take way longer to go through everything needed in order to recover a shard. So the recoveries are also going to be slower. The best way, benchmarking. But we've seen a value between 10 and 40 gig as the optimal range for a shard. Any node in a cluster, now we're moved from the Great Balancing Act, we're talking about divide and conquer, so we're going to talk about node roles. In Elasticsearch, any node can take all the roles. So you can have master data ingestion, can act as a coordinating node. The paid version of Elasticsearch also brings machine learning nodes, transform nodes, and you can configure nodes to be vote only in case you need to have uneven numbers or you need to have a break in the voting. So you can set vote only nodes. Leaving a node to have all the roles, it works. We're small clusters, but as the size goes up and the activities increase on the cluster, you might see different bottlenecks appearing, and following this, obviously, different problems. So where we're looking at an Elasticsearch cluster, we're saying if the cluster gets close to 10 nodes, we're going to start separating the roles. In case you have a large cluster or you make a lot of cluster state changes, you might end up with CPU utilization going up, and it starts making sense to have dedicated masters. And if you do end up with dedicated masters, just make sure you get an uneven number to not end up with split brains. You can't disable the coordinating role of a node, so even a master can still serve client requests, and this is really not a good idea. So make sure you don't send a client request to your master. Otherwise, in case you do something wrong and you take down the master, you're going to take down your clusters. If you are running ingestion pipelines and you are modifying the data as it's coming into the cluster, you can use the ingestion nodes to do this. In a search-heavy use case, your coordinating node will do a lot of work collecting information from different nodes where the requests are being sent to. So it might be a good idea to start having like nodes dedicated to handle client requests. And the way you do this, you basically disable all the other ones. So you cannot remove the coordinating facility. So if you remove all the other ones, you're going to be stuck with this one. In what regards the server types, the data nodes will mainly need a fast storage device and plenty of physical memory. A master node will not need that much disk space as the data nodes will, but it will need some disk space because some things need to be written to disk so it survives reboots. But what the master node exceeds at is using CPU. Coordinating node will only use a small amount of disk space because you're not writing anything on it, but it will use quite a considerable amount of heap. So it's basically a data node without that much storage. We have the master nodes here in front. So if you are working on AWS, you can look at some machine type of R5, and a 2x large should probably be enough for you. With the master nodes, as we discussed, are using more CPU, so you could look at the compute node. Again, the 2x large seems to be quite fine. And the data nodes are basically, they want everything. They need good, fast CPU, they need good, fast, and a lot of storage, and they need plenty of physical memory. So again, the R5 2x large with a bigger disk compared to the data or the client or ingestion node should do the trick. On the garbage collecting, which is the mechanism for Java to get its memory back, the default is CMS, which was a big improvement compared to the other ones because it allows lower stop the world pauses. And you could use you can tune some parameters for this. Elasticsearch doesn't really like this. On the parameters that you can tune, the initial occupancy fraction, which is default set to 75, is basically when the garbage collecting is going to get triggered. The max tenuring threshold is how many cycles an object will be able to go through before it gets promoted to old gen. And the new ratio is how to separate the new gen from the old gen. One big problem with CMS is that it needs to collect the whole old gen when it starts. So you might, if your old gen is big, you're also going to end up with large garbage collecting. G1GC, which is a newer garbage collecting mechanism, is focusing on 2048 areas, and it's going to know which areas has more garbage, and it's going to trigger the mechanism only on those areas, and it's going to try to keep everything within a specific time window. Don't use this if you don't use Java over version 9 because there was a bug that was corrupting the indexes. And also if you start doing this, since it's not something that it's officially supported by Elasticsearch, do some tests before and take a backup. So like I said before, it's the collector has a tunable that it's related to how much time it's going to run. That tunable is try only, it's not guaranteed. The way you use G1GC, you set the parameter, use G1GC, and if you're moving from other parameters or other garbage collecting mechanisms from before, just drop everything except the XMX, and the garbage collecting tunable, and use G1GC, and then add additional ones. You will see increased CPU activity using G1GC, and you might end up, if you switch to G1GC, you might end up with bottlenecked boxes on CPU. But it's going to be faster, it's going to be more efficient. So with this, you can even go over the 31 gig I mentioned earlier. The monitoring is really important. There are different tools out there that you can use. Prometheus, Grafana are the most common open source ones. And Elastic's own monitoring, which are the commercial ones. You can start using PagerDuty, for instance, to let you know when something is going on wrong on the box. And you can start picking what you want to alert on. Important bits to monitor on the OS level metrics, like we discussed before, the storage, the memory, the CPU. The garbage collecting times are really important, the heap usage, the caches and evictions, threads and queues you need to monitor in order to know when you need to add additional nodes. Pending tasks, maybe you are doing something wrong or you're doing something a lot of, and you can reduce that. The cluster state changes, again, if they spike, you know something has happened. Network activity, node uptime, whatever is important for you. On the schemaless of Elasticsearch, have you heard it's schemaless, but you do want a schema. Don't let it schemaless. The schema is being enforced through mappings, so it contains the name and type of a field. As we see here, the age is of type integer, email is of type keyword, name is of type text, and the way you get them is running a get against the index and again underscore mappings. Once a field's data type is defined, you can no longer change it without reindexing. So this is why you need to make sure that things are discovered correct. Elasticsearch will try to discover things for you using dynamic mappings, which usually gets it wrong. So you might end up with mapping explosions if you add fields, because it allows you to add fields, new fields constantly. You can end up with wrongly discovered fields, and so dynamic mappings without any control is not a good idea. So this is why you have the dynamic mapping, dynamic field mappings, which tells you how different fields should be detected. Dynamic templates, which add logic. So you can specify a specific field name is going to have a specific type. Dynamic mapping can also be enabled. False allows you to add additional fields, while strict is going to drop the request. After you define a mapping, you can automatically add this to the newly created index by using index templates. When querying Elasticsearch, a good approach is to try to take advantage of its caching capabilities. And you do this using filter context as much as you can, because these are easily cacheable. And the filter context is answering a simple yes or no question, whereas query context is going to answer how well does the document match your search. So this is on the left hand side you have a query context, on the right hand side you have a filter context. The queries that are used in filter context are stored in the query cache. It uses an RU eviction policy. It says it's being set by default to 10% of the heap, but you can monitor this and adjust as needed. Another important cache is the shard request cache, which basically needs the shards to not get changed. So this is a good use case for time-based indices, where you're basically going to index in the current index, while the ones that are from, let's say, last day, they're not going to take data. So in this case, you can use the useforce, the merge API. So basically, you're going to have everything stable and easily cached. With the index now having only one segment and that never changes, things are going to get easily cached. Other things to keep in mind, you need to look at improving the recovery time of your nodes. SyncFlush is your friend there. It's a good starting point. It might be useful, as I said earlier, to limit the amount of recoveries and recovery activity that takes place at the same time. It's a good idea to understand the queries that are being run in your cluster. So you should look at your slow log every now and then, maybe ingest it somewhere else in another Elasticsearch cluster and run some visualizations on it to make things easier to get discovered. That's it from me. I think I have some time for some questions. So
yes, we will use the last 2 minutes just to make sure that we have some questions, right? So, so thank you, Andrew. It was a very interesting talk. First of all, one of the questions that came up was specifically in regards to Java heap spaces. Is there a recommended value that they should keep in mind? For example, keeping in mind, for example, resources that they have on the system, right? So memory resources.
So you mentioned the areas. I guess the areas of the heap those are being, the heap itself is being segmented into those areas. So what we are talking about is within the heap. So if you are adding, if you are giving Elasticsearch 31 gig of heap, within those 31 gig of heap, that's when the areas are going to get segmented. So you have the new gen or old gen, and based on how you want to tune those, you can have those tunables that I mentioned earlier. How those are impacting you in terms of resources, I cannot give you a recommendation because there is none. The only way in which you can get this done is by benchmarking and monitoring. And you can monitor what's happening within the heap as well. So you can see like the old gen going up, hitting the level, and then doing the garbage collecting and then going down.
Okay, that makes sense. And indeed, it makes sense to monitor it, right? And make the right choices.